Hey everyone, you're listening to Home in Progress by Repco Light Paint, sponsored by Benjamin Moore. And this week has been insanely busy as I'm getting ready for some big events next week celebrating Contractor Appreciation Month. Anyway, because of all of that, I'm doing a best of show this week. I hope you enjoy it. I guess I'll tell you what we're talking about. At the end of the show, the last half of the show, we're going to be walking through a kitchen cabinet repaint project. Step by step, I'm going to lay it all out. Everything you need to know to decide if this is a project you can tackle, that you should tackle. If it's a project maybe you should hire out. I'm going to lay it all out coming up in a little bit. Right now, I want to talk about dust. I've got a lot of frustration right now and a bit of a confession to make. You know, my house is dusty, really dusty. I mean, I can't stress that enough, all right? It's like the Dust Bowl in there. A couple weeks ago, for example, I took my own advice and I spring cleaned one of the rooms that we've got in the house. And I went through it thoroughly. You know, we vacuumed, we moved furniture, we washed walls, we dusted. We did it all really well. We washed windows. We did all of that. And then within a week, everything's covered with dust again. I don't know why. I don't know how. It's horrible. It's everywhere. Honestly, it makes me glad that I'm short. In fact, let me get off on a quick tangent here. I know short people catch a lot of grief. We do. We really do. Most of the time, it's well-meaning. You know, everybody thinks it's well-meaning, but we do get teased all the time, and that's fine. That's fine. Whatever. You know, I can only speak for me. You know, I'm not speaking for all short people. I'm not their spokesperson. Their short person. I'm not their spokesperson. I'm not king of the short people. I don't get to just say what works for me and it works for all of us. No, we are individuals and everybody's got their own decisions to make. For me, I don't mind it. I can deal with it. You know, I can roll with it. But you know what? The more I think about it, the more I think it's actually ideal. You know, it's not just something that I kind of make fun of and laugh about. I think I've got the ideal situation. You know, for one thing, I was just talking with somebody about traveling, you know, by plane, and he hates it. Hates air travel. Why does he hate it? He hates it because he's a tall person. He can never get comfortable in the seats. There's no leg room. Guess what? I can sit in the seat in the airplane with my legs stretched out fully and my toes extended, and I still can't touch the back of the seat in front of me. Talk about leg room. I mean, my goodness, I can swim in that seat. My space on the plane feels like my living room at home. I've got so much leg room, it's crazy. Same thing with traveling by car. You know, I hear tall people complaining nonstop from the back seat. My legs don't fit. Can you move your seat forward? They're always asking things like that. You know, can I move my seat forward? Of course I cannot move my seat forward. My seat has been adjusted at the dealership to go further forward than other seats so that I can reach the pedals. I can't move it forward any more than it already is. What you're experiencing right now is more leg room than normal in the back of my car, and you still don't have enough. Guess what? I am always comfortable no matter where I'm going, no matter what vehicle I'm riding in. I could live in a back seat and feel perfectly at peace. So being short has tremendous benefits, and one of them gets me back to my dust problem. I'm glad I'm short because a number of furniture pieces in the room that I spring cleaned and around the house, for heaven's sake, you know, pretty much most furniture pieces are too tall for me to see the tops of them. You know, tall people living in my home. There's no tall people living in my home. What am I talking about? Tall people visiting my home, should such a thing happen, they would be in a constant state of sadness or despair over the dust that they would see. Me? I am blissfully unaware of most of it. So that's one blessing, one little blessing that I've got. Little blessing. That's a little bit of a joke there. Anyway, the dust is driving me nuts. I don't really know how I got off on that. It doesn't matter. The dust is driving me nuts. And I can hear a lot of you out there. You know, a number of you are probably shouting at me right now and telling me to get the air ducts cleaned out and that's going to fix everything. But will it? Will it? Will that fix everything? We're going to dig into that next week, actually, and the answer might surprise you. But right now, let's focus on dust. What is it? Where does it come from? And what can I do about it? And I know that sounds really ridiculous that we're going to talk about dust. If you've got a dusty home, this is all really good stuff. I was surprised at a lot of this. And I guess that's not necessarily, the definitive the determiner of whether this is good info if I'm surprised. I think you'll be surprised. Ride with me. This is good stuff. So let's talk about dust. What is it? Sounds really dumb, but like I said, it's interesting, more interesting, and grosser than you might think. So dust isn't just one thing. It's not just a thing, that's dust. It's a mix of stuff. It's dead skin cells. It's tiny textile fibers from your clothes, your furniture, your carpet. It's pet dander. It's pollen. It's soil. It's hair. It's all kinds of microscopic debris from just living your life. And then on top of all of that, to make it a little weirder and maybe a little grosser, you've got dust mites. You do. You've got dust mites. Now, you may be thinking, oh, I think not. We are meticulous with our cleaning, and I can guarantee you, you filthy little man, there are no dust mites here. Well, you can think that. You can think that, but you're wrong. You've got dust mites. I've got dust mites. We're all the same here. Nobody's better than everybody else. You've got dust mites, so do I. They're everywhere. They live in all that dust and debris that we've got. They feed off of our dead skin cells, and they add to the dust in our homes. Their waste, yay, and their body parts become part of that dust cloud floating around our homes. So first thing you need to understand about dust is that you don't need to open your windows for the dust to get in. Just keeping your windows closed doesn't keep it out. Sealed up homes with closed windows can build up dust faster than you'd expect. And it's all because a huge portion of the dust that we're living with is all created inside the home. It's created by you and your family, your pets, those wonderful little dust mites, and all the soft surfaces and belongings that make your house feel like home. All right, so the first bit of good news that I have for everybody is that you're probably, at least maybe not messy, like you might be thinking. You're not necessarily a filthy pig. It's just that you're alive, and you're living in your home, and that generates dust. So give yourself a break. You're not a pig, maybe. You might just be alive, and generating dust. All right, let's dig a little deeper now into the sources of this dust. And let's start with the people. And this is really fun. Every human being sheds about 1.5 grams of dead skin cells every day. Now, it doesn't sound like a lot, maybe, but it adds up. In fact, for an average person living an average lifespan, it's like 80 pounds. 80 pounds of skin in our lifetime. Skin cells that we're shedding. That's a lot of me that's getting spread around the house on a regular basis and inhaled by everybody, right? It's more than enough to feed a thriving dust mite population. All right, let's get back to the sources of dust. We've covered people. Another big one is our pets, right? Same story as with people. If you've got a dog or a cat, especially one that sheds, you've got another significant contributor to dust. So Maggie, my golden retriever, who sheds like it's a spiritual gift of hers, she's a problem, at least in this regard. She's a wonderful problem, but she is contributing to my dust problem. So you've got people, you've got pets causing dust. Then there are the fabrics in your home, your furniture, your bedding, your rugs, your curtains, your clothes. All of those create dust because every time you sit down, roll over in bed, walk across the carpet, anytime you do any of those things, tiny fibers are breaking loose. They float into the air, they settle onto surfaces, and they add to that dust cocktail that we've all been brewing. All right, last one I want to get to is, what about your HVAC system? Absolutely, your HVAC system plays into this. Every time your furnace or your AC kicks on, it's moving air through a network of ducts. And depending on the condition of those ducts, that air might be picking up more than just warmth or coolness on the way to your living room. Over time, dust can settle in those ducts, especially in bends and dead spots. And when the system turns on, some of that dust gets stirred up and blown into your space. Or some ducts, they're just not sealed well, and dust from attic spaces or whatever can get pulled into them and then redistributed through the home. And then there's your furnace filter. It's meant to catch airborne particles, but not all filters are created equal. Basic fiberglass ones will grab the bigger stuff, but they let the finer particles slip right through. If it's been a while since you changed your filter, or if you're using one of those low efficiency ones, that could be part of the problem. Filters with a MERV rating between 8 and 11 can strike a good balance, trapping more of that fine dust without choking your airflow down. Now, on a quick side note, we have talked about this before. Bumping up to a higher MERV-rated filter it might seem like a great way to eliminate dust, but it actually can put added strain on your HVAC system. A filter that's too restrictive can reduce airflow and make your system work harder than it should. So don't just go all in on the highest MERV rating out there. If you're not sure what your system can handle, check with the folks who installed it or a qualified HVAC technician. It's always better to be safe than to create bigger problems trying to solve a different problem. All right. So bottom line with all the HVAC stuff, if you feel like you're dusting constantly, your HVAC system might be quietly working against you, circulating dust instead of trapping it. So it's worth checking your filter. And if you're curious what's inside those ducts, there are some cheap little inspection cameras that you can grab online. You can feed them down the ducts. They've got little lights on them. They'll snake their way around and send images directly back to your phone, or sometimes they've got their own little monitor that they come with. They're a great way to scope out what's going on in there. And they're usually like $25 to $50, so super inexpensive. And you'll find a lot of other uses for them. So snag one, toss it in your ducts, and take a peek, just in case your system's hiding a few decades worth of gunk. All right, what about duct cleaning? Is it worth it? Would that fix the problem? Well, we're going to dig into that next week. There's a lot of questions that I want to ask about it, a lot of things I want to dig into, and we'll cover that next week on the show. All right, last thing I want to mention on this segment is that dry air can play into the problem. It doesn't create more dust, but it does keep it floating around longer. Now, the sweet spot for humidity is 40 to 50%. If your home is sitting at 30% or lower, you might want to look into a humidifier. That's going to help you. If you're not sure where you're at, in terms of humidity in your home, a $10 hygrometer is going to tell you. Go grab one online. That'll let you know exactly where you're sitting. All right, all of that is good info, but it doesn't really help us unless we get to the action steps. What can I do about the dust in my home? We're going to get to all of that after a quick break. Stay right there. Home in Progress is brought to you by Repco Light Paints and Benjamin Moore. People often think of paint as just another line item on the project supply list. But here's the thing. Everything you do, every hour of prep, every stroke of the brush, all comes down to the quality of the paint. The paint is the project. Make sure it's the best. And we're back. You're listening to a special Best Of episode of Home in Progress by Repco Light Paints, sponsored by Benjamin Moore. And we're talking about dealing with dust in your home. I hate dust in my home. It drives me nuts. Makes me feel like I'm a filthy pig. Like my family is a group of filthy pigs. Whatever that's called. A herd of pigs. I don't know what that's called. A group of pigs. A bunyan of pigs? That doesn't sound right. Anyway, a group of pigs, filthy pigs, that's what we feel like. That's what I think of us. When I see photos of all of us together, I think, wow, look at all those filthy pigs. I know what they do in a home. I know the dust they create. Drives me nuts. I hate it. So last segment, we dug into the sources of dust in our homes and what makes it worse and all of those things. Now let's get to some practical steps to help you reduce it dramatically. And I can't believe that I just suggested that a photo of my children all gathered together reminded me of filthy pigs. I am so sorry, children. I was just being colorful with my language, trying to have a little bit of fun with a topic that's not terribly fun. Anyway, let's get to some tips that will help you reduce dust in your home and hopefully reduce it drastically. And let's start with one that's bound to be a big hit: vacuum regularly. Now, I'm going to use the word regularly a lot in the next couple minutes here. And in this instance, the word regularly means way more often than you're already doing. So if you've got a dust problem, vacuum way more often than you're already doing. Vacuum more. And make sure you're using a vacuum that has a HEPA filter. All right? That is not rocket science. That is not startling news. Everybody knows that. That's not breaking news. But here are some things that you might not realize, and it might help you. A bagged vacuum system, the old-fashioned bag vacuums, those are better, significantly better at trapping dust than the fancy bagless systems. Unless you drop a lot of money and go with a really good high-end bagless vacuum. But the standard bagless vacuums that most of us have, a bagged system is generally going to trap and keep that dust better. Not just the emptying of it. We've seen the commercials where you empty the canister, the bagless canister, and dust goes everywhere because on the commercials, everybody empties that in their home. If you're doing that, that's probably where your dust problem is starting from. Don't empty your canister in your home. Do that outside. But, a bagged system makes that much easier. There's way less dust created. But also just in pulling the dust and keeping it contained in the system as you're working, as you're vacuuming, a bagged system does a better job. So if you're in the market for a vacuum cleaner and you do have a dust problem, something to consider. The bag system, they're not as cool, not as flashy, but it does at least trap and hold the dust better. So either way, whatever vacuum system you've got, vacuum more often and make sure that you're routinely replacing or cleaning your HEPA filter. That's going to depend on your vacuum cleaner, whether you clean it or replace it. Dig into that and make sure that you're maintaining that. Okay? That's the first one. Second, let's just stay right here with the vacuums. You've got to not just vacuum your carpets and rugs regularly, you also need to vacuum your upholstered furniture. And when you're doing that, don't forget to get under the cushions. So do all of that regularly, and regularly in this instance means once a week. So once a week, you're vacuuming the couch, the chairs, anything that's upholstered and under the cushions. That's the ideal. It sounds pretty bad, but it gets worse. If you've got pets, you need to do it even more often than that. I have pets. I probably will never turn the vacuum off from the way things look. So anyway, those are two things. A third thing, dust smarter. Use a damp microfiber cloth instead of a feather duster. Dry dusting just flings the dust back in the air, right? Trap it in the damp cloth and then toss it straight into the washer. That's the third idea. Fourth idea, and I'm going to warn you, this one's depressing. At least it was depressing to me. It's kind of like the first two that I talked about. You've got to wash your bedding and your curtains regularly. There's that word again. Once a week is ideal for sheets. That's regularly. So once a week, you're washing your sheets. Every couple of weeks, you're washing curtains and throws and all of that stuff. Oh my goodness. I got to decide how much I hate dust because it's either tolerate the dust or spend the rest of my life cleaning. I don't know. Trying to decide which one's worse. Anyway, sixth, moving on, simplify your space. If you have a lot of fabric-heavy furniture and you are considering, getting new furniture, maybe consider switching to leather or wood pieces. They're just not going to hold dust the same way. That might help you. Seventh, use air purifiers in high-traffic areas. This is not rocket science. They do work. I've got one. It's working overtime. I need more or I need a bigger one. But try an air purifier. That can help. Eighth, control your humidity. We talked about that in the last segment. If it's too dry, dust hangs in the air. So make sure that you've got the right humidity level, but don't make it too high because if it's too damp, you feed the dust mites that I said everybody has, and you also risk mold. So keep it between 40 and 50% in your home. That's a great way to go. Ninth, make sure you're swapping out your furnace filters regularly. And 10th, what about cleaning out your air ducts? I'm going to do a deeper dive into this next week. I've already said that. I want to talk about it because it's a popular idea out there and it makes sense. It seems like it would do a great job to clean up the air in our homes, but it's also pricey. So before you jump in and get somebody out to your home thinking this is going to solve all of your dust problems, let's dig into it a little bit further. And we're going to do that next week. And with that in mind, if any of you out there have had your ducts cleaned and you've got feedback or opinions one way or the other, by all means, share your experience. You can email me at radio@repcolite.com. I'm looking for as much info as I can gather. So if you've had a company come out and clean out your air ducts, let me know what you thought about the results. radio@repcolite.com. All right, dust. It's a fact of life. It's not a sign that you're doing a bad job keeping house. It just means your home is lived in. But that doesn't mean we need to be overrun by it. It can't be eliminated, but it can be controlled. So don't get discouraged. Try a few of these tips that we talked about. See what works. Anything you do is probably going to help. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to be talking about painting your cabinets. It's a big project, but it's also a project with a huge payoff. We'll talk about everything you need to know coming up next. Stick around. Home in Progress is brought to you by Repcolite Paints and Benjamin Moore. Think about it. You spend hours prepping, sanding, taping, and then finally painting. Don't throw all that work away with an inferior product. The paint isn't just another supply. The paint is the project. Make sure it's the best. And we're back. You're listening to a special Best Of edition of Home in Progress by Repcolite Paints, sponsored by Benjamin Moore. And right now, I want to jump into a major project. Over the last few weeks, we've talked about things like choosing colors, working with neutrals, painting ceilings, all kinds of stuff like that. But today, let's go to probably the preeminent DIY home improvement project, painting your kitchen cabinets. I think this is one of those projects where I can safely say that we have all either done this project at least once, or we've thought about doing it, multiple times. I think everybody falls into one of those two categories. Now, if you're in the second group, you've thought about repainting your kitchen cabinets, but you haven't jumped in, you haven't done it yet. The rest of the show, it's for you. It's my gift to you. It's going to help you. And if you have done the job before, but felt like you kind of struggled to get the great results that you wanted, well, you get a gift too. This rest of the show is for you as well. Everybody's going to win here. This is one of those best bang for your buck projects that you can possibly tackle around your home. The cabinets in your kitchen largely set the tone for how that space feels. They take up so much wall space, and they're the main fixture in there. That's what really attracts our attention in that room. So with that said, what are yours saying? If your kitchen cabinets are in good shape, they just look dated, maybe they're a color that you don't care for, if that's what you're dealing with, you can fix it for a relatively small investment for paint and supplies, plus your time and labor. You can completely change the entire look and feel of your kitchen. You'll be blown away at the difference. Just go online. I'm sure you've already done this because this is such a big project we all think about, but just look at before and after pictures online. Just Google them. And it's sometimes hard to even imagine that that's the same kitchen, and all that's changed is the kitchen cabinet color. So huge difference, not a big buy-in when it comes to expense. Yeah, there's expense involved, but it's not big compared to, a lot of projects. And what you get for it, it's a huge bang for your buck. So let's walk through the process step by step. And if you do want a free downloadable guide, just head to repcolite.com/cabinet guide. All one word, cabinet guide. Fill out that quick form, and then I'll email you the PDF, and you'll have all the info that you need to confidently tackle this project. All right, one last thing to clarify before I jump in. There are a lot of different cabinet situations out there. You could have stained and varnished cabinets. You could have painted cabinets. Who knows what else? All kinds of different things. The steps I'm going to describe in the rest of the show are similar for all kitchen cabinet repaints, but I'm specifically going to talk about the project as if you've got stained and varnished cabinets. All right? So some things will be a little different if you've got painted cabinets. For the most part, it's going to be all the same, but I had to pick one of these to focus on, or it's just too complicated. So we're looking at this as if you've got stained and varnished cabinets, and let's walk through the process. The very first step in this whole kitchen cabinet repaint project is to remove and label everything. So start this project by removing your cabinet doors, drawers, and all the hardware, the hinges, the screws, the handles, everything. And here's the most important part of this step: label everything. You'd be amazed how differently things can sit after years in one spot. Swapping them around might seem harmless. It does seem harmless. It seemed harmless to me, but it can cause doors to hang crooked and open weirdly. You don't want that. So use a numbering system. Cabinet 1 gets labeled 1. If it has 2 doors, call them 1L and 1R, left and right. Mark it on the back of the doors where the hinge goes so it's hidden later. Just drop a piece of painter's tape in that hole or on that spot, and then label it with a Sharpie marker. Label it clearly. And then once you've done that, label your hardware too. People forget this step. I forget this step. But you've got to bag each cabinet's hinges and screws in its own plastic bag and mark it with the matching number so that it stays with the cabinet door that it came from. For extra safety, if you really want to be good and methodical and complete in this step, sketch a quick layout of your kitchen so you know where each number belongs when it's time to put it all back together. I skip this step normally. I number everything, and then I forget which side I started on by the time I get everything ready to go back together. And I'm always a little bit confused if one starts on the left side of the kitchen or on the right side. So draw that little sketch. That'll help you out. Now, I know this part feels tedious, but you're going to thank yourself later. I've already implied it. I've already said it. I've skipped this step. I've labeled the doors, but not the hardware. And I assure you, even though the hinges look identical, my doors never hung as evenly after I painted them. So swapping hinges really does make a difference. Keep them all together. Same doors, same hinges, same screws. All right, that's step one. Now it's time to dig into the actual prep work. And I know prep work absolutely stinks. It does. It stinks. It's boring. It doesn't provide a lot of visual payoff. It's not like rolling primer on or paint. It's just not fun like that. Prep work is pretty much everybody's least favorite part of pretty much every project, and yet it's crazy critical. Prep is easily 90% of almost every project. It should be. 90% of the time you should be prepping, and 10% of the time you're actually applying the paint. You just need to get used to that. That's how it works. If you can accept that and stick to it, you're going to have great results. All right, so doing the right prep work, it's all about laying a great foundation. If that foundation is poor, everything that you pile on top of it, everything you build on top of that foundation is going to be questionable. If you skip your prep and you don't adequately clean the surface, scuff, sand, or prime where you should be priming, you just shouldn't expect great, long-lasting results. And one other thing to think about is if you do skimp on the prep work and go ahead and just paint anyway and then run into issues down the road, it's not easy to fix at that point. You've got one shot really at doing the foundational work, the prep work right, so don't skimp on it. It feels boring. I get all of that, but it's kind of, it's the make or break point of your project. Do the prep work, do it well, you'll have good results. All right. All of that blathering on, let's get to the actual prep work. The first thing that really falls into this prep work stage is going to be cleaning the cabinets. You've got years of cooking grease, oily fingers, airborne gunk of all kinds. All of that's there in your kitchen, and it's going to kill your paint job if you skip this step and leave it on there. So use a good degreaser. Spray 9, that's a great option. We carry it at Repcolite. TSP, trisodium phosphate, that works really well. Even, Dawn dish soap will do. Scrub everything down using a Scotch-Brite pad and then rinse everything with clean water and let it dry completely. All right? That's your first step. Now that you've got that done, scuff sanding is next. And everybody groans when this step gets brought up. I don't think anybody likes scuff sanding. Nobody likes scuff sanding. But there's good news. It is not as bad as you think. You are not trying to remove your varnish or layers and layers of old paint. All you're trying to do is dull the surface down so your primer has something to grab onto. A quick once-over with 180 grit sandpaper should be perfect. And if your brain is like mine and you need more details or a more clearly defined, idea to work with, how about this? You should be able to scuff sand a typical cabinet door in under a minute. It's not an intensive sanding. Just zip over it, dull that surface down, and you're good to go. When you've got that done, wipe off all that sanding dust with clean water and let it dry. Now, if you're going to use an orbital sander for any sanding in this project, be sure that you're following that information that I laid out last week. We talked about it on the show. I talked about how you can avoid swirls in your finish when you're using an orbital sander. So you can access a blog post about it by heading to repcolite.com/sandrite. All one word, sandrite. That's got all that info. So if you're going to use an orbital sander on this project, make sure you're following what I laid out there. So check that out. All right, scuff sand the doors and then wipe them clean with a damp rag because you've got to get that sanding dust off of them. And I know there's probably a few people out there wondering, thinking about, wait a minute, I had to wash them first, then I wipe them again later. Why would I do that? Why not just skip that first washing step and do it later? Here's why you've got to do it in the order that I laid out. If you don't wash them first, but you go straight to scuff sanding, you're probably going to grind all kinds of whatever surface contaminants were there. You're going to grind them into the finish deeper, and that's going to cause problems down the road. So you've got to wash them off first, then you've got to scuff sand, and then you've got to remove any of that sanding dust that you created by wiping them down with a damp rag and some clean water. All right, once you've got all of that done, you're finally ready to prime. And this is a crucial bonding step that sets the tone for the whole project moving forward. So choose the right primer for the surface. Sticks, Quicksand from Repcolite, or Benjamin Moore's Fresh Start, they're all excellent choices. I love Sticks. It's an incredible bonding primer. It really gives you a tremendous foundation that will help resist chipping down the road. So Sticks, absolutely a great way to go. Repcolite's Quicksand, it's another great option. It's one of those sneaky surprises for us. We engineered it to be a great all-purpose primer, but we were really surprised to find out how well it bonds. So if you're looking to save some money and still get a primer with some good bonding power, Repcolite's Quicksand is a great option. So check into that. Whatever you use, whatever primer you use, once you put it on, you need to check for stains after it's dry. All right, we're talking about this project, if you remember, as if you're painting over stained and varnished cabinets. If that's the case, it's possible that there could be some discoloration from tannins bleeding through the wood. Now, the chances are the varnish that's on there will seal them in, but you should still look for them. Maybe you sanded through the varnish in some places, or maybe the deep open grain of some oak doors just didn't seal well. Either way, see if you can detect any brownish discoloration bleeding through your primer. And if you notice that, you don't need to panic. You just need to spot prime those areas with Bin Shellac Primer or Repcolite Zip Prime. These products are going to seal those stains off and prevent them from bleeding through your final coat. Now, you could use Zip Prime or Bin on the whole project, but they're just not fun to work with. There's a lot of odor to them, and if you can get by with a regular water-based primer for most of the work and then just spot prime a few little areas, you're way better off. Now, most of the time, there's not going to be any tannin stains bleeding through, but you do want to catch it if there is. Just putting another coat of water-based paint or primer over top of them won't help. They'll keep bleeding through unless you block them with the right primer. All right, so you got to make sure you catch them. All right. That's halfway through the project. And I know it's a lot of information, a lot of product recommendations that I've given. Remember, you can find all of what I just said online at repcolite.com/cabinet guide. So go and check that out. You can follow along with that. It'll just give you all the extra info that you might have missed as I'm rambling on and on. We're going to take a break right now. When we come back, we're going to talk about sanding your primer, choosing the right finish paint, and then how to avoid some of the biggest mistakes most people make in the final steps. It's all just ahead. Stick around. You're listening to Home in Progress, where the projects are real, the mistakes, they're educational, sometimes painful, mostly educational, and the only thing more stubborn than that old wallpaper on your bathroom wall is your determination to get it fixed. Proudly sponsored by Repcolite Paints and Benjamin Moore. Paint with a purpose, people who care, and everything you need to get the job done right. And we're back. You're listening to a special Best Of edition of Home in Progress by Repcolite Paints, sponsored by Benjamin Moore. And in the last segment, we walked through the first half of a kitchen cabinet repainting project. We covered everything from removing and labeling the doors and hardware all the way through cleaning, sanding, and we just covered the priming step. Now, after your primer dries, but before you go to your finish paint, there's an extra step that a lot of people skip. And yet it's one that really, separates a good finish from a great one. Here's the scoop. Once that primer's completely dry, it's got to be completely dry. Once it's completely dry, take some 220 grit sandpaper and just give everything a light dusting. You're not removing the primer, you're just smoothing the surface. You're knocking down little lumps, little goobers, whatever you want to call them, that ended up in the primer. Do that light sanding and then wipe everything down with a damp cloth to remove the dust that you created. All right, once you've done that, finally comes what most people think of as the fun part, the color or the paint part, putting the finish on. When it comes to this point, use a high-quality product like Benjamin Moore's Advance, Cabinet Coat, Scuff X if you're brushing and rolling it, or consider Repcolite's Optima. All of these are great, excellent options for cabinets. They're durable, they're smooth, they're designed for beautiful finishes that will hold up. Now, as for tools, I'd recommend a good brush. Get a good brush like the Corona Excalibur, the Chinex brush. That's easy to clean up. It applies paint beautifully and evenly. It's a great brush to have. Don't skimp on your brush. Get a good one. And when it comes to roller covers, I really love to recommend Wooster's Micro Plush covers. These are ideal rollers when it comes to cabinets. They're going to give you a smooth, almost sprayed look. So Wooster's Micro Plush covers, great way to go. Apply a nice even coat of your finish. Don't rush it. Don't glob it on. And once you've got that first coat down, just let it dry. According to the manufacturer's instructions, whichever product you picked, it will tell you how long it needs to dry. Let it dry that time. It's usually between 3 and 6 hours, depending on temperature and humidity. Now, after that paint has dried, here's another one of those steps that a lot of people skip. You would ideally do another light sanding, just like you did after your primer dried. It's the same deal. You're going to take a 220 grit sandpaper and just give it a light pass, over your doors and drawers, just to knock down any bumps or imperfections that might be in that first coat of finish. Once you've done that light sanding, wipe everything down again with a damp rag, let it dry, and then you're ready for your final coat. Now, this step, this extra little sanding step in between, is what gives your cabinets that professional, buttery smooth Buttery smooth, we all want that. This is what gives it that buttery smooth finish, so don't skip this step. All right, after that light sanding, and after wiping that dust off, and after the doors dry down from your damp rag that you went over them with, once that's all ready, you're ready for your second and final coat of finish. And you're going to apply it just like you did the first one, thin, even, and smooth. If you've done your prep work right, the second coat is going to lay on beautifully, and it's going to give your cabinets a really professional finished look. Now, when it's all said and done, you've got everything finished, everything painted, let everything dry thoroughly. A few days is best before you reinstall. It's going to help you avoid smudges, dings, tackiness, stuff like that. Definitely, you don't want to run into issues where you damage or mar the finish that you just painstakingly put on these. Don't mar that by rushing to get them reinstalled. All right, so give it the proper amount of time to dry so that you can reinstall it without any of those concerns. Now, once you've got all of that done, it's time to bring it back together. So you're going to grab your layout sketch, grab those labeled bags of hardware, and then reassemble the kitchen. Everything needs to go back right where it came from. And it should be easy because you labeled everything really well at the beginning. It's just a matter of matching the numbers up at this point. And let me tell you, when everything is hung, leveled, and clicked back into place, it is a really good feeling. You're going to stand there in that freshly painted kitchen, and you're going to think, yeah, I did this. And it's amazing. Really great project. You're dropping some money for the paint, but you're not going through tons and tons of paint, tons and tons of primer. Relatively small investment when it comes to the paint side of things and the tools. All of that's a relatively low buy-in. The payoff is absolutely huge. So really consider this project. If you're interested in getting the full rundown again, something written down, repcolite.com/cabinet guide. You'll get everything that I spelled out plus some. All right, last thing I've got for you, a few final things to keep in mind. When you're rolling that paint on, don't overload your roller cover. Too much paint means more drips and lap marks. Plan on 2 coats. People run into problems when they try to make 1 coat cover, and this is true for walls, for anything. You need to apply it at the right pace, and just if it takes 2 coats, it's going to take 2 coats. If you try to make 1 coat cover by overloading the paint, most of the time, if not all of the time, you're going to run into some problems down the road. So with your cabinets, plan on 2 coats of finished paint and just apply it evenly, and you're going to deal with less problems down the road. All right, so that's the first one. Second, and this is really important, don't try to wash and reuse your roller covers. That can work for some projects. I'm not a big fan of that regardless, unless you're working outside or just applying primer or something like that. If you're working inside on your walls or for sure on your cabinets, get a new roller cover for every step of the process. They are not expensive. It's a cheap buy-in to give yourself some extra insurance to get a really nice finish. When you wash out a roller cover, it can clump a little bit, and it can definitely affect how that finish looks. So when it comes to this project, use a new one for your primer, use a new roller cover for your finish, use new roller covers for the second coat of finish. You're going to appreciate better results down the road if you do that. It's probably going to cost you an extra $10 total. All right, so there's that. Third thing, give yourself some grace. Nobody is going to be inspecting your work with a magnifying glass except probably you. Everybody else, they're going to just think it looks great. So do your best and then let the little imperfections that do happen, let them go. Nobody's going to notice them. Don't point them out. I point them out all the time. That's just dumb. Nobody else will see them. Don't point them out. And finally, last thing, always use a quality paint. It's easier to work with, it's going to give better coverage, and it's going to last longer. All right, there you go. A complete guide, a complete audio guide to repainting your kitchen cabinets and getting great results. If you missed any of it, or if you want to check out something that you can just read all those steps, head to repcolite.com/cabinet guide. And I've got it all there for you. And of course, swing by any Repcolite store. We're always happy to walk you through this project or any project that you've got going. We'll help you find the right products, the right tools. We'll give you all the info you need to get through your project and get great results in the end. And if you heard all of that, listened to all of those steps and thought, man, that is beyond me. That is not something I want to tackle. I'd love the results, but I don't want to do the work. If that's you, maybe you need to find the right pro. And if that's the case, you can do that by heading to repcolite.com/find-a-painter. Just fill out that form. I'll send you some names, and you can get that process rolling. And there you go. That's it. That's going to do it. If you want to catch this episode again, you can find it online at repcolite.com. Just click the On the Radio tab on the homepage and check it out. All right, whatever you do today, make sure paint's a part of it. And remember, your next project is way, way easier than you think it's going to be. Stop out at your nearest Repcolite and let us help. Have a great weekend, everybody, and I'll see you next week. I'm Dan Hansen. Thanks for listening.